Over 1,000 years, a society on the Indian subcontinent went through one of the most incredible shifts in human history. I mean, it's a story of how nomadic herders laid the groundwork for massive empires, how simple chants turned into deep philosophy, and how a world of scattered tribes became a world of powerful kingdoms. This is the story of the Vedic Age.
So, the big question we're tackling today is this. How does something like that even happen? What are the key ingredients, the catalysts, that can completely reshape a civilization from the ground up? That's the mystery we're going to unravel together.
Here's our game plan. First, we'll get a handle on what the Vedic Age actually is. Then, we'll dive into the Early Period, this world of pastoral tribes. After that, we'll watch the great transformation unfold, see how their religion evolved, and finally, we'll talk about the legacy that still echoes today.
All right, so to really dig into that huge question of transformation, we've got to start with the basics. What exactly was the Vedic Age, and how do we even know about it in the first place?
So we're talking about a huge chunk of time, nearly 1,000 years, from around 1500 BCE all the way to 600 BCE. Historians split it into two really distinct halves, the Early Vedic, which is also called the Rigvedic Period, and the Later Vedic Period. And trust me, as we'll see, the world at the end of this timeline looks almost nothing like the world at the beginning.
So how do we know any of this? Well, our main source is the Vedas, these foundational sacred texts. But here's the wild part. For centuries, they weren't written down at all. They were known as Shruti, which literally means that which is heard. Think about that. It was a massive body of knowledge passed down purely through oral tradition, memorized and recited with perfect precision from one generation to the next.
Now, the people who composed these hymns are often called the Indo-Aryans, and the most widely accepted theory is that they migrated from the Central Asian steppes. And this isn't just a guess. We have some pretty solid evidence, like the Bagaz Koy inscription. It was found in modern-day Turkey, dates to about 1400 BCE, and it specifically mentions Vedic gods like Indra and Varuna. That's a huge clue that really backs up this migration story in the timeline.
Okay, so let's jump back in time and paint a picture of that first phase, the early Vedic world. What did life actually look like for these people? What was their day-to-day like?
Well, their whole society was built on family and kinship. It was pretty straightforward, really, organized in these nested groups. The most basic unit was the kula, the family. A bunch of families made up a grama, or village. A group of villages formed a vis, or a clan, and all the clans together made up the jana, the tribe. That was the biggest political unit they had.
The tribal chief, or Rajan, wasn't some all-powerful king. No way. His power was kept in check by these tribal assemblies. You had the Sabha, which was like a council of elders, and the Samiti, which was more of a general assembly for the whole tribe. And here's something that might surprise you. Women were allowed to actively participate in both. That tells us a lot about their relatively high status during this early period.
And their economy? It wasn't about land or gold. It was all about livestock. This was a pastoral society. And cattle? Well, cattle were everything. Wealth was literally measured in cows. A rich person was called a gomad, meaning one who has cows. The cow was so important to their survival that it was called agnya, not to be killed. They had some agriculture, sure, but it definitely took a back seat to herding.
Their religion totally reflected the world they lived in. It makes sense, right? They worshiped the powerful forces of nature all around them. Their number one god was Indra, the god of thunder and rain, this powerful warrior who cracked open the clouds. Then you had Agni, the fire god, who was seen as the messenger between humans and the gods, and Varuna, who kept the whole cosmic order in check. It was a very direct, vibrant relationship with the natural world.
But then, right around 10,000 BCE, things started to change. Big time. A new technology and a geographic shift came together and kicked off this massive, society-wide transformation. And the main catalyst? It was a new metal. The later Vedic texts start talking about something called Krishna Ayas, or Shyama Ayas, literally the dark metal. They were talking about iron. And let me tell you, it was about to change the course of history.
So, what happens when you combine iron tools, we're talking stronger axes to clear dense forests, better plows to turn over heavy soil, with a massive move into the super fertile plains of the Ganga and Yamuna rivers? Well, you get a revolution. That's what happens.
Just look at this contrast. It's night and day. The economy goes from being all about herding cattle to being dominated by settled farming. The politics, it shifts from being tribal and based on who you're related to being territorial, based on control of land. Society, which had a more flexible class system, hardens into a very rigid hereditary hierarchy, and the status of women takes a huge hit. They're now shut out of those political assemblies they used to be a part of.
The old tribal unit, the jana, becomes the janapada.
That name literally means where the tribe places its foot. It's a territorial state. The king isn't just a tribal chief anymore, he's the ruler of a specific piece of land. His power grows like crazy, and it's backed up by these huge, elaborate royal rituals like the Ashvamedha, the horse sacrifice, which was all about claiming dominance over a territory.
Now, as society changed so dramatically, so did the spiritual world. It had to. The relationship with the divine got a lot more complicated. It moved away from simple worship toward these complex rituals and eventually to some really deep philosophical questions. The old gods of nature, like the warrior god Indra, started to fade into the background. In a settled agricultural society, you have different concerns, right? So new deities like Prajapati, the creator, and Vishnu, the preserver, became much more important. They reflected this new focus on creation, order, and stability.
Religion itself just became more formal, more complex. These huge, elaborate sacrifices became the main event, and they had to be done perfectly by a specialized class of priests. The simple, heartfelt hymns of the early days, they gave way to a system where the exact performance of the ritual was everything.
But not everyone was on board with this. This growing obsession with rituals sparked a reaction. Towards the end of the Vedic Age, a whole new set of texts popped up, the Upanishads. And these texts were a radical shift. They turned away from external rituals and focused on internal searching, on introspection. They started asking the biggest questions you can imagine. What's the nature of reality? What am I? What is the self? How do we find true freedom?
And at the very heart of the Upanishads is this absolutely mind-blowing idea, the concept that Atman, the individual soul or self that's inside every single one of us, is identical to Brahman, the ultimate universal reality of everything. This incredible insight that you and the entire cosmos are fundamentally one and the same would become the bedrock of Indian philosophy for thousands of years.
Okay, let's take a breath and pull all of this together. Over the span of about 1,000 years, we have just watched a society go on an absolutely incredible journey of transformation.
So we've traced this amazing arc. We started with a semi-nomadic, pastoral society of tribes with a pretty fluid social structure. And over a millennium, driven by iron and agriculture, it was completely remade into a settled civilization of territorial kingdoms defined by a rigid social ladder and an incredibly deep philosophical tradition that questioned the very nature of being.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. The Vedic Age may have ended over 2,500 years ago, but the ideas it gave birth to, the idea of a territorial state, the framework of a social hierarchy, and that deep philosophical search for the self, they laid the foundation for so much of what came after. So the question is, how do these ancient ideas continue to shape and echo in our world today?